The Green Bay Packers have taken the NFL world by storm this week. Micah Parsons is in Green Bay, and a contender now has turned into maybe one of the biggest contenders in all of the National Football League. Welcome, everybody, here to 32 on 32 on Chase's Sports News, where we preview every NFL team season with a team reporter. Today, we preview the Green Bay Packers' upcoming season with a very special guest, a local WFRV reporter, Cameron Nazare. Cameron, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Of course, I don't know how special I am. I think this team is a little more special than me. So maybe let's talk about them. I don't got any sacks or millions to my name yet.
Well, I mean, you get to cover the Green Bay Packers, which I'm sure is obviously a huge
Pretty
plus.
cool.
And I mean,
Yeah.
it's been unbelievable because they're one of the NFL's most consistent franchises. I think across the board, they're the best franchise in the history of the National Football League when you look at their consistency and player development and history and how they kind of have shaped the way that we think of the National Football League. And so not only have they done that, but now they're again a contender. And let's talk about the elephant in the room, but the great one for the Packers, and that is the fact that Micah Parsons is now in Green Bay, a trade that goes down less than 2 weeks before the NFL season. How much of a shock was this? I really didn't even know the rumblings were there between Green Bay and Dallas. And what kind of impact do you think he's going to make here with the Packers?
Yeah, I mean, we were all waiting for chatter to turn to clarity, right? Because there was a lot of it, a lot of chatter, which just wasn't really from sources that you could
Sure.
fully trust. Because we've gotten to the point where, unless it's Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport or one of those names, Tom Pelissero, unless it's one of their names tied to it, you can't fully trust it because then you just believe it's speculation. And obviously, everyone on social media is going to throw out as many rumors as possible.
I think
If
Micah
they hear
Parsons
something.
was linked to like 10 teams at a
Yeah,
point.
right.
So, yeah.
Exactly. But I know in Green Bay, I think over the last couple of days, the amount of times that me and my coworkers would just send stuff to each other and say, okay, it's starting to pick up enough steam where you can start to believe even the chatter or the rumors. I haven't told anyone this, but I was in the bathroom when this happened. I had my coworker run in and yell Parsons. He didn't even say what it was with Parsons. He just said Parsons. And I was like, okay, here we go. Us in the media had Friday, Saturday, Sunday off, or at least we were supposed to. But then, of course, once that trade ultimately got done on Thursday, and again, it wasn't just the trade, it was the extension, that $188 million extension, because a trade wasn't going to get done without a long-term deal. We then got the press release that he'd be talking on Friday. Now, there were complications with that, with travel delays and everything. So he ended up speaking closer to 7 o'clock, and he talked for a good 24 minutes. And what I took out of that, and I know we'll talk a little bit later about what that press conference entailed, but he is so ready to just get back on the football field, especially in a place like Green Bay with so much rich history. He said he didn't have a lot of control of where he was going to end up if it wasn't going to be in Dallas, but he's happy that it was Green Bay. You mentioned the shock. Yeah, there was a lot of it, right? Because it's a week and a half before the season. This team's prepping for the Lions. And not just that, they have 2 games in 5 days to start the year. They have the
Right.
Lions on Sunday, then the Commanders on Thursday. So, yes, you're adding a premier piece, but you're doing so by taking continuity out of your team, by trading Kenny Clark, one of the leaders of that defensive group. And with all the injuries that are surfacing with this team, there were a lot of doubts of, well, would they go into week 1 healthy? What would that look like? And then you add a guy like Parsons. So there is more uncertainty, but there is no doubt that you're adding just such a talented piece to that pass rush, a pass rush that was probably the weakest part of the Packers last year. So, yes, Chase, a lot of shock, but what came out of it is you're bringing in a guy that just makes this team younger, more disruptive, and allows second-year defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley to really be creative with his schemes.
For sure. And what I find so fascinating about Parsons is, I had a conversation. John Machota, the athletic athletic reporter for the Dallas Cowboys. He came on my podcast earlier this summer. We previewed the Cowboys season, and one of the things he mentioned is like, obviously, it wasn't Parsons hadn't requested a trade yet. Those kind of conversations hadn't started at the time of the conversation. But one of the things he said is like, yes, he's remained consistent. Like statistically, he's been right there in DPOY conversations season after season, and that's a key factor. But maybe I know Skip Bayless kind of had this clip as well go viral online that maybe defenses are like figuring him out. And it's crazy to say when you have a 12 sack season after season. But one of the things Machota mentioned was his size. Like he's not a normal size for someone who plays the position, and he's really just relying on his speed. Long term, we're talking about $47 million. You're talking elite quarterback money now, and you're giving that to a defensive player. Is it going to be worth it in the end for Green Bay? As crazy as it sounds, obviously it's a trade worth making, but you could have one of the top 15 players in the world on your fingertips. But long term, do you think the deal is really going to work out?
So Packers general manager Brian Gutekunst told us yesterday that, and he said this maybe 10 or 15 times. He ended every single comment with this: that when there's an opportunity like this, it is so rare for a player that unique in his prime with his best football ahead of him that it's something that you just can't pass up.
Right.
And it is so rare. And Matt LaFleur even walked in. He made a joke with us when he walked in. He's like, "What are you guys doing here?" Right? And he said it's just a rare opportunity to bring in a player of that caliber. Long term, you could understand the financial ramifications of it and how this could diminish this team in terms of signing other players long term, right? Because you just signed Zach Tom, your franchise right tackle, to a $88 million deal. You still have Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney on 4-year deals from last year. You just signed Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs to 4-year
Jordan
deals.
Love.
Now you're right, Jordan Love as well with that $220 million extension. So you're eating the dead cap of trading Kenny Clark. So you got to eat the 17 million next year, 35 million total. But long term, I think this creates a window for the Packers. Long term, I think they'll be fine. Brian Gutekunst said he loves that the cap room that they're in over the next 3 years with this deal. In terms of, if you look at the breakdown of the contract, it actually works in the favor of the Packers for the next couple of years in terms of the money that is doled out and how they've opened up cap room. They actually still have cap room this year, which is shocking to say, but his base salary this year,
Right.
Micah Parsons, isn't really going to kick in. That contract kicks in next year. So the base salary this year actually works in their favor. Yes, this helps this team long term, but what is your definition of long term? Are we talking 5 years? Or are we talking 10? If I'm saying the next 2 to 3 years, this helps them in a way that you couldn't even have imagined of bringing in a guy of that caliber and also still being fine financially, because this team has a lot of guys that are still on their rookie deals. You think of safety Evan Williams, safety Javon Bullard, cornerback Carrington Valentine. A lot of these guys, linebacker Tyron Hopper, linebacker Edgerrin Cooper, a lot of these guys are in their second or third years where this is the time to make the move, because once their 5th-year options pop up, or if they're not top picks, then their 4 years are done with their rookie deal. Then you can worry about signing other guys long term. If you're in your second and third year, you don't have to worry about that this year or the next. So you're bringing in a guy that you have long term. You have a lot of guys on your team currently that are locked down for at least the short term, and they don't need those two first-round picks. They
Right.
got their wide receiver in Matthew Golden. They already got their other wide receiver in Jaden Reed. This might mark the end to Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs' time in Green Bay. They're both on contract years, and you can't really pay them big time money next year, but they're both injury prone, so that actually might work in your favor. So as much as you might look at this and say, you're paying this guy how much money? I think you give up anything that you can, because you've seen over the last 2 years, you are ready. And if you don't take that opportunity right now, a guy like Micah Parsons, he will not be available in the future.
I mean, Dallas fans have been a victim of such strategy now 2 times this year between Luka Doncic and Micah Parsons, kind of for that same reasoning of, look, you're going to sign them to this mega extension. It's going to work in the short term, but then who knows? I mean, now you have a larger window in the long term. I think Parsons will be able to keep up his production. I think that he is an extremely talented player. And look, I think the trade is 100% worth it. Clark is on, I think, the wrong side of 30, if I'm correct, or maybe exactly 30 years old.
29.
Yeah. So those 2 first-round picks are not really going to mean much in the future anyway. So I just think that adding Micah Parsons is huge. And this is a stars league. You look at the teams that win the Super Bowl every year: the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, the Eagles with Saquon Barkley, the Rams a few years ago with the Cooper Kupp, who was the best receiver in the world at the time. This is a stars league. And now if you have Jordan Love at quarterback, who could very well be one of the best in the league if he can limit his turnovers and maybe have some better receiving help around him, and then you have Micah Parsons defensively to add to a group that was already one of the best in the league last year, they're a bona fide contender already. I guess the question for me, though, is you mentioned this in one of your recent segments that you posted on social media about the Parsons, trade and coming to Green Bay and everything. And that's that, like, he hasn't played football in a long time. I think he said it was the longest he's played since 7th grade, something along those lines. So how long is it going to take him to get back in the swing of things? Because you mentioned those 2 games in 5 days. It's going to get quick. It's going to get late early if they don't win games early on in the season in a tough NFC North.
One thing I'll also mention about Parsons, I think that opens up Rashawn Gary, who was a first pick a couple of years back, right? It's a guy who hasn't had a double-digit sack season in his career, but he's been a multi-time Pro Bowler. Also to mention, Parsons joins this team as the most recent guy to have more than 10 sacks on the Packers. The last guy to do it was Zadarius Smith back in 2020. So
Wow.
I do think that his production will only continue to rise, especially because you have young bull rushers on the inside, even without Kenny Clark, and then Rashawn Gary on the outside. Who are you going to double team? Who are you
Yeah.
going to stop, right? Like that defensive line now becomes one of the best in the NFL and also one of the youngest, so they can grow together over the next couple of years. Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that question that you just asked is we'll just have to wait and see. He said he received his iPad from Jeff Hafley when he landed. I mean, he was met at the plane by Jeff Hafley and the new D line coach DeMarcus Covington, which I love. DeMarcus Covington has brought a fervor and energy in that D line room. Where Brian Gutekunst at the end of last season said, "We showed at times what this line is capable of, what that front is capable of, but we just weren't consistent." He felt like they had the right guys, but now you bring in a force like Parsons. Honestly, we're just going to have to wait and see. He said he's going to go back to Dallas, going to fly back to Green Bay. I think it's Saturday or Sunday because we're recording this on a Saturday, but on Sunday, and then he'll get with the team, and then you just got to kind of work in the ramp it up process. Again, he's still dealing with that lingering back issue. He said he met with team doctors, and one thing that stood out, he said, "I didn't come to this team. They didn't bring me in. They didn't take all this risk for me to sit on the sidelines." He said, "Physically, I'm feeling great." I don't know the validity to that because I haven't seen him out in the practice field.
Right.
But as much as I'm looking at Parsons and say it might be a concern right a week before the season, how are you going to get him acclimated? I don't think it matters how you get him acclimated. If he plays 30 snaps against Detroit, it's better than not having Parsons at all. He doesn't need to play 70 snaps. He kept saying, he kept emphasizing, like you said, the seventh grade comment that you guys just don't understand here in the media just how relieved I am to put my hands on someone, to get back on the football field, to just, he said he's just been missing something that he's loved. So as much as I want to take those comments and say he's ready now, he's going to play 60 snaps against the Lions. Then when the Cowboys game rolls around week 4, he'll be a full go. I just don't know. We'll see him at practice this upcoming week. But Matt LaFleur said it is going to be a process, and we'll see what that process is for this week and the weeks following.
It obviously will have to be a conversation, but I think sometimes it's like in sports, you don't want to overthink it. When you have a top 15 player in the world, who cares about the scheme? Put him on the right or left side, whichever you prefer, and let him rush the passer.
Well,
Because
also, Chase, I'll say one more thing, not to interrupt, but Jeff
no, go.
Hafley has said ad nauseum, like, and he said this when he first came into the Packers system after he was at Boston College, is I want these guys to be loose. That's my biggest thing. Yes, I want to incorporate a scheme, but I want these guys to play fast. If they make mistakes, you learn from them on the fly. I just want them to go. And I think that fits Micah Parsons so well. A guy that you mentioned has 12 or more sacks in each of his first 4 seasons. Honestly, the best defense he could have joined a week before the season is Jeff Hafley's, where it's like, have at it. Rush the quarterback. We don't need you to try to, clip here and knock here and open things up for the nose tack. No, like Micah Parsons, go. Like just do your thing and play free.
And I think statistically, he could have probably a career year when you look at, you mentioned who you're going to double team on the defensive line. It sounds easy, Micah Parsons, but then other guys are going to be opened up. There are just so many pieces on this Packers defense. One of the reasons why they were one of the best in the National Football League last year. And now you implement Micah Parsons into that scheme. And boy, oh boy, they're going to be tough to score against. And that's going to help them because they're going to play a lot of great offensive teams this year. Having a guy like Micah Parsons and having some others on that defensive side of the ball, it's going to make their life challenging. Let's move on from Parsons for a second, as much as we want to talk about it. There are other parts to this team. What overall just stood out to you from the Packers training camp and preseason action as they were ramping up and getting ready for the season?
What stood out is who was just standing up and not playing football, all the injuries. My God. I mean, before this Parsons news, everyone was tempering their expectations on this season because you just didn't know what it would hold with so many guys injured. You bring in Aaron Banks, 4 years, $77 million on the offensive line, and he's been out with a back injury. He's been taking snaps off. Emmanuel Wilson, the backup running back for the Packers, almost tore his ACL. He was out for a week with a knee injury. Marshawn Lloyd, who missed all of last season, the 3rd-round rookie, groin injury, and now hamstring injury, and he was just put on the PUP list, I think so. He's out for the first 4 weeks, I think it is. Christian Watson, who tore his ACL in week 18, he's slowly working his way back, and he wants to be back after the bye week. Jaden Reed was just in a boot. Dontavian Wicks out with a calf injury. It just felt like a Costco receipt of players just dealing with those ailments, and you wondered what would this Packers team look like. And that's not even considering the fact that Jordan Love was out for a week, getting surgery on that torn ligament on his thumb on his non-throwing hand. So I think that's what stood out, unfortunately, right? Everything else has seemed very consistent because this Packers team, it's not like they added a whole lot of pieces or took away a whole lot of pieces. TJ Slayton's in Cincinnati now, Kenny Clark's in Dallas. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they're pretty much bringing back everyone outside of their center, Josh Myers, and acclimating Elton Jenkins, who's traditionally a guard or a tackle, to be the center. And I didn't even mention on the defensive side of the football, Xavier McKinney has missed most of training camp, right? He had eight interceptions last year that led the team. Nate Hobbs, their new signing, he had a surgery on a knee injury. So
It's just
unfortunately,
one after another. It's like a domino effect almost. Like, yeah.
I wish I could give you a better answer outside of the injuries have stood out. But honestly, that's what this training camp has been about, is what is this team going to look like by week 1?
And we'll obviously have to see which pieces do come together. When everyone is healthy, this team, talent-wise on paper, I think is one of the best in the National Football League, but it's just all going to have to come together. We saw what they did last year and the year before. You're a postseason team. The one year you pull off an upset as a 7th seed against the Cowboys, and the next year you fall to the Eagles, but they ended up winning the Super Bowl. Nothing to be ashamed of there. Overall, it just feels like this team is on the incline, ready to maybe take that next step. You mentioned some of the offseason moves, Nate Hobbs, Aaron Banks, but then you also got wide receiver Matthew Golden, and I want to touch on that for a minute because earlier in the offseason, I spoke with Tom Grossi, who is, the big Packers content creator. I don't know if you've seen his reaction to the whole Micah Parsons thing, but he is sure entertaining. And one of the things he said is like, the Packers, they do it with their quarterbacks, they do it with their players in general. They don't like rookies to just be thrown out there. But with the Packers wide receiver core, which we can get into in a minute, it's been very shaky over the past few years and haven't put Jordan Love in a prime position to succeed. Or do you think we're going to see, particularly with the injuries too, do you think we're going to see Golden out there with a major role playing as that wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 in week 1? Or do you think they're going to slowly ramp him up to such role throughout the season?
After last season, I don't believe in the wide receiver 1, wide receiver, the numbers, right? We went in that locker room and asked them a year ago, who's wide receiver 1? And they all looked at us like, can you stop asking this question? Like, we have a lot of depth on this team. Now, to get to your point about Golden, this guy's dynamic. And he's been thrust into a role where he's had to be their pseudo wide receiver 1 or 2. At one point when Romeo Doubs got hurt with a back injury, Dobbs, Wicks, Reed, and Watson were out, and you're looking like, and then Savion Williams, their 3rd-round pick, was out, and you're like, do they have wide receiver? They were throwing out Cornelius Johnson and Julian Hicks. So Matthew Golden had to be the wide receiver 1. And I asked Matt LaFleur about it. I said, are you impressed with his maturity? Right? He just got here 4 months ago, 3 months ago, right? This guy's 21, 22 years old. Like, are you impressed with it? Have you seen his maturity grow because he's been thrust into this role? And he said, I don't even think it's just that. I just think you get better with more reps, right? When you take more reps, you're a better football player. And because he's gotten more reps, he's been a better football player over time, and he's grown into that NFL role. There's that catch that he made in that final preseason game against the Seahawks on that first drive. It was just ridiculous. Just contorted his body around the DB to make that catch deep downfield. The answer to your question, because as you can tell, I'm very long-winded. The answer is yes. Like, Matthew Golden will play a lot, and he will be a premier wide receiver on this team because he has to be. Because again, the health. Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks are back at practice, but Golden has taken a majority of those reps. His speed, his hands, just his way that he can weave around DBs, run routes. I was saying he's a good collection of all the Packers wide receivers. The way that he catches the ball, we said in the media, and I don't know if Tom Grossi said this as well when he's been over at training camp, is Romeo Doubs is one of the purest hands catchers in the NFL in terms of when that ball reaches his hands, it doesn't matter where it is, it sticks to his gloves. Matthew Golden is much of the same, and then add a sub 4.3 speed to that. Like, Matthew Golden is the real deal. This guy's got all the intangibles. I mean, I think he's in the conversation for Offensive Rookie of the Year just because of the production that he will have to partake in. And Jordan Love is going to spray it out there because he has a lot of wide receiver options. Again, Jaden Reed a couple of years ago broke Sterling Sharp's rookie reception record in terms of the amount of catches he had. I think he had 64 or something like that. I would say that's well in danger if Matthew Golden's on the field.
I mean, Golden's is just such a talented player. I love the pick for Green Bay. It was the first time I think in 23 years they had taken a wide receiver in the first round, and so I think obviously you have to consider that. I think he's going to have tremendous success. However, say all the pieces are healthy at wide receiver, you're going to get Christian Watson back eventually. I still am a little bit concerned because it feels like there's no one in there where you're like, he is going to be that dominant number one threat. We see that on some teams where, like, okay, you have a lot of guys, some what ifs, but that guy's reliable. That guy's going to be your definite number one go to pass catcher in the biggest moments. And I feel like Green Bay doesn't have that. Maybe it will be Golden, but we haven't seen him in NFL regular season action yet. So we're going to have to see throughout the season. Last year, I saw a stat, I think Warren Sharp tweeted it out, that the Packers had the biggest dip in completion percentage because of their wide receivers. No team had a bigger dip because of wide receiver errors. Now you go into this season, you add Golden, you have some of the pieces healthy. Is that still going to be a problem? Because I think that was part of the reason why Jordan Love had some issues last year.
No, I mean, last year, as much as you might tell, Jordan Love had some issues. I think it was more so that sometimes he just wasn't on the same page as his receivers, and that comes with growing and acclimating with guys you're really just getting to know for the first couple of years, because he has a lot of young receivers. So I think it's less about not having a designated wide receiver one and just having a lot of young guys in your team that haven't played a lot of football. They dropped a lot of passes last year. I mean, in that first preseason game against the Jets, we all kind of looked at each other because they kept dropping passes. My goodness, can they just catch a ball? And Jordan Love told us in one of those first press conferences at training camp that he felt there were a lot of times where him and his receivers were off the mark, and he feels like he fixed that with a lot of them in training camp. Now, that could just be a comment that he made. You
Sure,
just
yeah.
you had to wait and see, right? But he worked out with Romeo Dobbs in California. I know him and Christian Watson have a great relationship. Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, they both work out in Florida together. So I feel like as the team grows, you're going to start to realize that depth might be more important for this group, especially considering you have a bell cow like Josh Jacobs in the backfield who can finally get his bearings under him, right? He's not just the new guy thrust in. So if you can rely on that run game a little bit more, I think that gives Jordan Love time in the pocket. And I also will say that offensive line last year was very, very wishy-washy. And a lot of the times Jordan had to evade the pocket, and a lot of those throws felt like he wasn't comfortable making them. So I think with time, with growth amongst these wide receivers, you're going to realize they might not need that wide receiver one, but they just might need the collection to buy into the system of we just need to make plays, and it seems like everyone's doing that.
And you want to talk about making plays? There are only a few in the entire league who make more than Jordan Love. And like, look, you can say some of his faults, maybe some decision makings, mishaps here and there, but I think he's generally considered a top 10 to 15 quarterback in this league, one that can win you a Super Bowl. I know that Mike Tannenbaum's gone viral many times for talking about how he thinks he's the most talented quarterback in the league, and in terms of just actual skills and intangibles, he's 100% right there. He does seem a little bit inconsistent, though, turns the ball over a little too frequently for my liking. Do you think he's ready to take that leap into superstardom like he's getting paid to be with, 55, 57 million a year?
Yeah, 100%. The biggest thing that I noticed in the offseason, I think the team noticed as well, and they told us over and over again, was his vocal leadership has grown. Remember, this is a guy that sat behind Aaron Rodgers for 3 years, as Rodgers did with Favre. And then it's like all of a sudden, this is your team. And by the way, the average age of your team is 25. Right. It's not like Jordan Love was thrown into a system where it was built for comfortability. It was built to be a rebuild. And then they did well toward the end of that, his first season as a starter. And then the expectations were just through the roof because he had one great game in Dallas. And I
Right,
do think
they were kind of playing with house money the rest of that year too, and all of a sudden they had to make this leap into contention immediately for fans to be satisfied, it felt like.
And I will say he had a great back end of his first year as a starter. I think it was like 17 touchdowns and 1 interception. That's great, but can you do it in the playoffs? And once he proved he could do it in the playoffs, I think people put him in the upper echelon just because what you'd seen out of a 10-game stretch. And then he got hurt 3 times or 2 times in the first 4 weeks or 5 weeks of his second season as a starter. And no one even considered the fact that derailed his growth as a player in his second year. And now he's in his third year as a starter. And now you're starting to consider, okay, you're a vet in this league. He's 6 years in this league, 6 years in this system. I think there's a long way to go for Jordan Love. But the biggest thing for him is to take control and say, this is my team. The Green Bay Packers are my team. And I think he's realized that. And everyone in that locker room respects him. I understand what you're saying about the turnovers and the completion percentage and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that everyone is not considering the fact that those injuries last year weren't, a torn ligament on his non-throwing hand, right? They were lower extremity injuries that would affect his movement in the pocket, that would affect his load. If you realize one thing with Jordan Love, and I wish I could like do a demonstration, is for some
Yeah.
reason I know a lot of parody accounts like to mimic this. He likes to lean back and throw. It's very nonchalant, right? Or
Yeah.
looks nonchalant. Imagine doing that with a knee injury and a groin injury and any lower extremity injury. Your timing is going to be off. And then you miss 2 games or 2.5 games to start the season, and you get hurt 3 times. And now you're worried about your knee and the lower aspects of your body. So I just think everyone needs to chill a little bit with Jordan Love in terms of the criticism, because I do think that we went from here with Jordan to here to wait, why isn't he here anymore? But it's because he was recovering and building back up. So
Right.
I think there's a long way for Jordan to go. I'm not saying he's a perfect quarterback, but I do think his best football is ahead of him. And it starts this year because now he's a vocal leader. He understands it's his team. He has the confidence, and he's worked with these guys before. This isn't just year 2 in the system. Now this feels like year 6 for him, building off of the momentum that he's already picked up upon.
For sure. And I think that we do this, I feel like all of us just as analysts of the game, it's very easy to critique and nitpick. And like, look, part of previewing is like I have brought up some of the spots on this Green Bay team where you can maybe question. But at the same time, they now have Micah Parsons. They have one of the best defenses in the league. They won 11 games last year and happened to run into the beast that was the Philadelphia Eagles. Who knows maybe how the season changes if they get a different first round matchup. So sure, you can nitpick here and there, but overall, this team is in a very, very good position. And I like Jordan Love. And I think that like I'm just kind of curious to pick your brain on this real quick before we touch on something else, break down the schedule and wrap things up. Just kind of a quick answer. Like obviously it's hard to just think about without really shaping your list. Do you think Love's one of those top 10 quarterback guys? I know it's such a popular debate these days, but like do you really think he's in that echelon?
In terms of potential, yes. I mean, I think anyone can say, "Oh, I can name 9 better quarterbacks than Jordan Love." But
Right.
in terms of potential, it is intangibles and what I've seen and his accuracy in the offseason, how he's taking control of this team 100%.
We'll have to see. I'm very excited to see how we will operate. And I think Jordan Love is one of those better guys in the league. You have Josh Jacobs at running back. Overall, the offense looks solid, but I want to touch back on the defense. Obviously, you had Micah Parsons. We've touched on him, but across the board, when you look at success rate, red zone rate, all that stuff, they were terrific. And then they forced 31 turnovers last year, the fourth most in the league. A lot of people, maybe now the conversation changes with Parsons, but I know a lot of people in the offseason have called that fluky. Do you believe in that? Or do you really think, especially now with the implementation of the Pro Bowler and All Pro and Micah Parsons, that this defense is again going to reach that next tier on that side of the ball?
I think what you worry about is the corner room and then the expectations, right? You lose Jair Alexander. Now Keyshawn Nixon is your cornerback 1 with Carrington Valentine. And Valentine has proven himself, but he's still a 7th-round pick. And he has to go up against George Pickens, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamar Chase, like name the guys, and Justin Jefferson. It goes on and on and on. And then Nate Hobbs hasn't really practiced. And they have a lot of shuffling they have to do if they want to play Javon Bullard at the nickel, or if it's Nate Hobbs, Carrington Valentine, and Keyshawn Nixon, if those are your 3 cornerbacks across the board. So I think the question marks definitely lie there, because you don't have, like you mentioned, you don't have a wide receiver like your premier guy, like a Devontae Adams. Well, on the cornerback side, you've had a premier guy in Jair Alexander, despite injuries, of course, on that side of the football, and now you don't. And you have to go up against a lot of receivers that can torch DB rooms. The turnover conversation, now that's where the expectation becomes a little wary. They went from a team that couldn't force turnovers, I think it was 17 and 18 games the
Yeah.
year before Jeff Hafley got there, which is why Joe Barry got fired, to bring in Jeff Hafley. Let's play faster, right? They had 45 sacks on the year, but half of them came in 4 games. So I think Micah Parsons helps with that. But in terms of the interception total and the forced fumble total, Hafley has told us ad nauseum in the offseason, we want to lead the league in forced fumbles, which is kind of ironic because they were top 5 in the NFL last year in forced fumbles. So it didn't seem like that was an area they had to clean up. But it seems like as the offseason has gone on, they realized last year was good, but it can be better. And you might say, how? You were top 5 in the NFL in forced turnover. How could it be better than it was a season ago? And I think that's where your possible problem could lie, right? Because now the expectation is not just 31, it's more than that. And if you get less than that, that's not a bad season, but in the eyes of them, they might view it that way. So I wonder what that's going to look like in terms of what the total is by the end of the season and how they view it. Because this offseason, they have just absolutely emphasized punching at the ball, forcing fumbles, attacking the ball, being ball aware. What will that come to? You mentioned the fluky nature of it. I don't think that the uptick in how they did was a fluke. I think it was just switching defensive coordinators and buying into the system. But I do think with the expectations now being higher, just as they were with Jordan Love, there's only a downside because people are going to expect 35 forced turnovers. And if it's 28, it's the Green Bay Packers. So everyone's going to, go crazy about why that was the case. But every time we've talked to a defensive player in that locker room, Chase, they've said, we feel so comfortable in this system. We finally have familiarity. Keyshawn Nixon, the cornerback, said, hey, guys, the benefit of having half back is that it's not a learning system anymore, right? We just get to play fast. We understand the calls that are coming from the sidelines.
For sure. And I think that having a better defensive scheme and having the talent that they have around them, we'll see if they can replicate that. I think they can. I think they're one of the best units in the league, and adding Micah Parsons sure will help. Real quick before we break down the schedule and wrap things up, as we do with every team, I want to touch on the head coach, Matt LaFleur, and he's held the job for a little while now, made the postseason every year but one. And, I talked about the consistency here for this Green Bay team. How instrumental has his presence been to kind of this consistency in this Green Bay team? And that's included a lot of roster turnover and changing quarterbacks, and they remain so consistent. What does that say about LaFleur and how great of a coach he is? Can he reach that Super Bowl?
Well, what I will say is that the new Packers president and CEO, Ed Policy, didn't say he would extend Matt LaFleur or GM Brian Gutekunst into this season, but he doesn't want them to sit on lame duck years because then they'll be in contract years next year. So this is almost a prove-it year for Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst. Yes, you mentioned he's made the playoffs 5 of the last 6 years. He's been to 2 NFC championships, but it's the Green Bay Packers. They haven't been to a Super Bowl in 15 years. So as much as the success has been consistent, it's funny, Micah Parsons' brother tweeted out when they met Matt LaFleur the other day, Matt LaFleur is a cool dude. And I think that's what LaFleur brings to that locker room. He is one of the guys, right? It doesn't feel like he is a Mike McCarthy where he's 40 years older and you can't really relate to him. I feel like you can really relate to LaFleur, and he's good at picking his spots of when to get on guys. There was a training camp practice where he laid into everyone. So about a week into training camp, just laid into everyone in that huddle, and all of us media are looking like, whoa, we haven't seen that before. And he was saying some things that we can't repeat on this podcast, but I think that is the benefit of having a guy like LaFleur, is that he's young. He desperately wants to win. I also love his offensive game planning. If you've seen any of Dan Orlovsky's breakdowns of how they utilize their receivers and their running backs and their tight ends, they kept 4 tight ends this year, and I think that'll be instrumental for them because they usually only keep 3. I think the things that they could do, the workarounds, are going to make the offense look really good this year. So I think Matt LaFleur has done a fantastic job. He's one of the guys. He fits in. But I do believe this is a prove-it year because as much as it's great to make it to the playoffs, the Green Bay Packers don't just make it to the playoffs. But it seems over the last decade and a half, that's all they are. So LaFleur definitely has to lead this team to higher heights.
Expectation. You there? Sorry, I just cut out.
No, you're good. Yeah, I'm there. Yep.
So interesting how the action for a coach needs to do to keep his job in the national that change however, they could he's had one terrific season. Meanwhile, you have guys like Mike Tomlin now after season, yet they're not like being fired or they're anything like that. I think it's interesting, different for franchises different expectations. And I think in Green Bay, the expectation win circles. Again, I've said before, I think they're the franchise in the history of the National Football League. And when that is the expectation set, sure, if LaFleur's not getting the job done, maybe you want to move elsewhere. But then there's the conversation of, is the grass isn't always green others? Going to be someone else. You've seen how great he's been with Jordan Love. You've seen how connected with this core. We're going to get someone else who could still build that same connection. It's an endless battle that you can go back and forth debating. But for sure, I find it so fascinating how the playoffs for the New York Giants or other franchises is the bar that a coach needs to meet one of every 3 years to keep their job. For the Packers, it's more of an expectation. I think it's for the Packers, the Steelers, the Ravens, the Chiefs. Like those seem to be the teams where, like the Eagles, the expectation isn't playoffs. It's more than that. And I find that so fascinating for different franchises.
Yeah, Packers general manager Brian Gutekunst, after they lost to the Eagles a good 4 days after, walked up to the podium and put it bluntly. He said, "It's time we start competing for championships. It's been too long." Yeah, the ceiling, it is very, very weird that the ceiling for certain teams is the floor for others. And again,
Yeah.
2 years ago, you thought that the ceiling for the Packers was, can we grow this young team into something that's sustainable for the future? And now they just signed Micah freaking Parsons, right? Like I think the change as well, like the just the flexibility of the NFL of just how it can change so drastically. You went from the Packers being so young and what could they be to what can they be, and right now I think they're Super Bowl contenders.
The stability of national football as well, because every year you talk about teams they're going to get in the water, and those end up being the teams that are contenders. Who had Minnesota with a 14-win season on the go card last year, and kind of on the contrary, who had the Cincinnati Bengals missing the playoffs fully healthy with that kind of season from Joe Burrow. It's just you never know. That's what makes the season so fun. That's what makes this time of year the most enjoyable and pleasurable. In terms of any year. Any time of year. For me, football season is my favorite time of year, and I'm sure it is for you too. Let's break down the schedule here real quick, some of the games that Green Bay might be looking at this season. I'll change the
I love
layout, make
this.
sure it looks good for all of us. Thank you so
My
much. I have my
God, Chase. I got to
thank
give
you.
you a raise. My
I
gosh,
have
this is
my
nice.
projection on there as well. I do this for every team. 10-7 I have for them. It's a tough schedule when you're playing in the NFC North. It is going to be a tough schedule. It's funny. It's a third place schedule, but it's the sixth hardest in the league, third hardest in the division. So they're not the only ones in this division that are going to be going through just such a tough schedule like this. Overall, what stands out to you? I think, a 10-3 start, but a 10-7 finish. So kind of a fall off in the back end of the year.
Yeah, it looks like what happened last season, right? And not what happened the year
Yeah.
before. So the year before, they needed to win their final couple games to get in the playoffs. And the year after that, which was last year, they went in with no momentum and they lost their final 3 games of the season if you include the playoffs. So it looks a lot like last year, which, if you're saying this team is a Super Bowl contender, I don't agree with how you finish the season, because if they finish the season like that, Chase, this team's not doing well in the playoffs, because the last 2 games of the 2024 season completely derailed their momentum going into the playoffs. You thought they were playing with, we don't need to do too well these last 2 games, and they needed to, because then they wouldn't have run into the buzzsaw that is the Eagles. So, losing 5 out of their last 6 games, I can see where you're coming from though, because this schedule is difficult. Those home games are ridiculous, right? With the Ravens and the Eagles and the Bengals and the Commanders, and so I don't mind the prediction here, and obviously to each their own, right? But I think if you're considering this team a Super Bowl contender, then losing 5 out of the last 6 games will only be a detriment for them. And I also think that those offenses looked a whole lot better against the Packers when they didn't have Micah Parsons. So I think that'll change drastically when you get to 10-3 or wherever you are and you get to the final 4 games. I think you'll look at this team and have a different view of them, just because we haven't seen how this team works together with Parsons on defense or with a lot of the offensive guys back. So I think at 10-3, you'll either look at this team and say, okay, they'll go 2-2 in their final 2 games, or gosh, this team could go 4-0 in their final 4 games. But the schedule's really, really difficult. I agree with you that they got to dominate early on and prove their chops in the division. Again, last year we're 1-5 in the division, and we're a blocked field goal away from going 0-6. So I think that's the most important thing for them, is do well in the division, then go from there.
In terms of those divisional games, I have them splitting with Detroit, splitting with Chicago. I think those rivalry games, that's an improved Bears team this year. And I think splitting with the Vikings as well. So 3-3. And I feel like if there are people who have been watching every 32 on 32 schedule breakdown, they're going to be like, oh my God, Chase is going to say this again. If you're a contender, go 3-3 in your tough division and move on and get the wins elsewhere. It's what I always say when you're in a tough division. If you're in the NFC North, if you're in the AFC North, if you are in the NFC East, in these divisions with multiple contenders in them, it's not like it's like the Bills against the AFC East. They should win 4 or 5 of those games. It's not like the Bucks or Falcons in the AFC South where they should win 4 or 5 of those games. It's not something like that. When you're in the NFC North and all 4 of those teams have the potential to make the playoffs, you splitting with your division is a major win, particularly with what Green Bay did last season. And then the question becomes, can you find the 7 wins elsewhere? And I think they can. I think it gets interesting because I'm personally, I am a diehard Ravens fan, so I'm circling that matchup with the Ravens. I think that says it's actually the Ravens at Lambeau Field against
Yeah.
the Green Bay Packers. And I think that's going to be a fascinating matchup because the Ravens and the conditions, we've seen before, they don't play well in the snow. If it is kind of a snowy, bad weather type game, that could go in Green Bay's favor. However, Baltimore also plays well against the NFC. Some of these like situational matchups I find fascinating. They also have a ton of primetime games early on, which I find pretty cool as well. That beginning part of the schedule, definitely favorable. You have the early bye week, which again could be used to just acclimate Micah Parsons into the system. But the Cowboys, they're certainly going to beat the Cowboys. Micah Parsons 4 sacks in the game. I think that's just going to be a after trade situation with Micah Parsons in Dallas. I think they're going to blend, not improved. See what happens. They should be able to take of these games early on. And I think if you do, you set yourself up in a position where if you do go through a slump, you're still going to get into the postseason. And unlike I have here, you got to hope you just get hot at the right time and let the chips fall as they may. But yeah, I think overall it's a very, very tough schedule. I think they'll be battle tested quickly, and I think we'll learn a lot about this team.
Remember, the word expectations will stand out. This team went 1-5 in the division last year and finished with an 11-6 record. So when you look at that compared to the year prior, I remember talking to those guys in the locker room being like, yeah, there's definitely a jump that you might not want to have taken from Jordan Love's first year as a starter to second. And they all looked at everyone in the media like, what are you talking? We won 2 more games, but it just didn't feel that way. So if you go 10 right, but if you go 10-7 and lose 5 out of your last 6, I think that when you talk expectations, that is a disaster of a season for a Packers team that now has the world on their shoulders, right? So, I think you need to win the division. This team has put an emphasis on that, especially after last year. Taking the North is kind of that moniker with this group. You mentioned it; it's a tough schedule. If they can start 4-0 going into the bye week, I don't know. I honestly, I'd love to see this graphic, Chase, after in week 5. And I think a lot of your L's will turn to W's. I don't know. I think the best case scenario for them is they start 3-1 before the bye week. And the worst case scenario is they go, 1-3. And if they can even split 2-2, just because of all the injuries, you beat the Lions in week 1. I think that sends a message to the NFL.
For sure, 100%. I think that it's overall going to be a very interesting season. And it's so hard to project schedules ahead because you don't know who's going to be injured, which teams are going to be hot. Like, personally, I'm not high on Minnesota this year. I think they'll have a drastic fall off. So we just don't know. Real quick, before we wrap this up, though, and I guess we'll kind of just take the schedule graphic off for this. You mentioned taking.
Bummer. It looked so good.
Thank you. In the NFC North. And, yes. Oh, screen just cut out. You there?
Yeah, I'm good. Yep.
All right, cool. I'll edit that out. Don't worry. So you mentioned possibly taking the NFC North. That's the kind of a goal here for the Green Bay Packers. I mean, the Lions won 15 games last year and were the most injured team in the NFL. Do you think they'll be able to go past the Lions? Because I still think they're the better football team, even with Micah Parsons in Green Bay.
I think that's all based off what we see in game 1 and what the Lions prove to the NFL about losing both their coordinators and if that'll even matter. So my answer to you right now is I don't know, because when we get to also week 1 does not determine the rest of the season. even though last year they beat the Packers in Brazil and won the Super Bowl, did the Eagles. But I just think
Yeah.
we got to wait and see. I mean, they definitely have the potential to, because they're better than the Bears, they're better than the Vikings, the Packers are, and so are the Lions. But I just have to see what that offense and defense looks like without those coordinators to really give you a determination. Because right now it's all speculation. They have the chance, and I think with Micah Parsons, they're on a more even playing field with the Detroit Lions because that offense is so dynamic. But you just got to wait and see. Maybe till week 4 or week 3 or 4, and kind of say, okay, this Detroit team is the same, right? It's still Dan Campbell led. I just got to see about that, and then see the trajectory of the Packers in terms of who they get back from injury and how effective they are early on. Because fast starts is something they did not take advantage of last year. I don't think they ever trailed by a touchdown a year ago, or they never. I think they never lost a game. It was something like that. Like if this team starts fast, they do well. So
Yeah.
we'll just have to see by week 1.
It's going to be a fun season. Cameron is there. One last question for you before we wrap up.
So
What is your projection for this team this year? We're talking about what ifs, what can happen, the injuries, all this stuff. What happened? Say we do this again next year. What happened in the 2025 season that we're looking back on?
I think that his defense proves to be top 5 in the NFL, and it's everything you would have wanted. I do think that Christian Watson comes back around week 7 or 8 and makes that offense nearly unstoppable. They lose a couple nail biters because the offensive line is just all out of sorts. I think the O line's fine, but if they can't protect Jordan Love, and I just feel you got that gut feeling that O line will be fine, but over time they might deteriorate, and the youth on that team, they just don't seem ready for NFL action. I think this team makes it to the NFC Championship, and I will not say anything further beyond that. But I do think that they are NFC Championship bound, and I think it'll look prettier than your schedule had it looking. I think this team wins the NFC North now that they have Micah Parsons.
Hey, but the pretty layout of the schedule, I don't know if their
Very
season
pretty,
is better
yes.
than
No,
that.
yeah, I'll take a pretty layout over a pretty season any day. That looks great. Come on.
Cameron Azera, thank you so much for coming on the show today. The Green Bay Packers have kind of been the team to talk about the past few weeks, or the past few days, excuse me. So the fact that you were able to come on here today on short notice, we really appreciate it. And for the audience, one of the last team preview, just a few more to go here as we preview every team season here from 32 on 32 here. Cameron Azera, thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Best of luck season and best of luck, Green Bay Packers fans. To comment, and I'll have a link in the description to see my episode earlier. Tom Grassi out will be a link to that description as well. We're going to alongside our host Chase Coburn saying so long from Chase's Sports News.